Here coming to the concept called native VLAN. So native VLAN is like, it is a concept where, so if any packet is received on a .1 queue link, so if there is no VLAN tag information, by default the switch is going to assume that it belongs to the native VLAN. So the default native VLAN will be always, it will be 1. So if you are giving a command called show interfaces trunk, so you will be seeing that the native VLAN will be always 1. Okay. So in general, on your trunk links we are going to run something called 802.1q or ISL encapsulations. So whenever a user is trying to send any packet, so whenever it receives on the switch, it is going to add the tag. So tag is nothing but a VLAN information. So assume that this traffic belongs to VLAN 10, and once it receives on this particular trunk interface and it receives on the switch 2, and whenever the switch 2 receives this particular packet with the VLAN 10, so automatically it is going to send that information to that specific user presented on VLAN 10 interface. If you take an example of hubs, so hubs, they really don't understand the concept of frame tagging process or trunks. So whenever the traffic was coming from this side, automatically it is going to send to the default VLAN called VLAN 1. Okay, because there is no VLAN tagging information was available on this access links. So coming to the best practices, what native VLAN we are going to use, and what are the best practices we can use. So in order to perform this native VLAN best practice, you need to create some VLAN. So let's say VLAN 400. So, and you need to ensure that whatever the VLAN we are creating, this VLAN should not use anywhere in your network, and there is no port should be associated on that specific VLAN. So because in general there will be something called VLAN hopping attacks which is going to happen on your network. So if there is any attack of VLAN hopping is going to happen, so it is going to directly send to this particular VLAN, and it is going to drop the packets over there. Okay, so this is the concept of native VLAN. So the users can be anywhere in VLAN 10 or VLAN 20, whatever it may be, but they can able to communicate with each other. So if there is any information, if there is any packet was coming without tag information, by default it is going to send to this specific native VLAN. Okay, so now we'll see this configuration of native VLAN. So it is a simple and straightforward configuration for the native VLANs. So in general, you will be creating something called VLAN 400, and this VLAN you should not use anywhere in your network, and you need to log on to the interface F0 by 10 and switch port mode trunk, and you need to say switch port trunk native VLAN 400. So whenever you say this, you will be getting some warning message that so the CDP native VLAN was mismatched, because in Cisco the native VLAN should match on both the interfaces, both the trunk link ends. Okay, so that's the reason if the native VLAN was mismatching, you will be getting some error message called CDP native VLAN mismatch kind of thing. Okay, so just go to lab and we'll see how we need to configure this native VLAN. Here what I'll do is I'll be taking two switches. Let's say I'll be connecting here two switches, switch 1 and switch 2, and here I'll be connecting interface called F0 by 20 to 20 here, and I'll be connecting here two PCs for testing purpose. Okay, and interface F0 by 1 and interface F0 by 1 I'll be connecting here, and I'll be assigning some IP address to this PC. So the IP will be 192.168.1.1, and for this PC I'll be assigning I1.2. done. So now if you go and try to verify, so ipconfig 192.168.1.1. this is my IP address, and if I try to ping to my 1.2 user, I can able to communicate. The communication was happening. So what I'll do is I'll be going to my command line of my switch 1, and here I'll say enable configure terminal interface F0 by 20 I have connected, and I'll say switch port trunk encapsulation .1q switch port mode trunk. Done. Now let's go to this switch 2 as well, command line, and you can say no enable configure terminal interface F0 by 20 switch port trunk encapsulation .1q switch port mode trunk. Done. Now if you give the command show interfaces trunk, see here the interface F0 by 20 was in a encapsulation using 802.1q, and this is the manual trunking which I have configured now, and by default the native VLAN will be 1. So now again if you go and verify the communication between 1.1 to 1.2, the communication has to happen between these two devices from 1.1 to 1.2. Yes, the communication was happening here, right? So now what I'll do is I'll change the native VLAN. So by default if you give the command show interfaces trunk, the default native VLAN will be 1, right? So here I'll be configuring something called VLAN 400 and exit interface F0 by 20 switch port trunk native VLAN, and I'll be saying here native VLAN it should be 400, right? So now again if you go to the switch to command line, you will be getting here something called CDP native VLAN mismatch. See here the port was in a inconsistent stage on the interface F0 by 20 because it was having a native VLAN called VLAN 1. So that's the reason the interface F0 by 20 was in a blocking state. If you go and verify show interfaces trunk, see here on this side the native VLAN was 1, and if you go to the switch and if you give the command show interface trunk, it was having the native VLAN called 400. So that's the reason the interface F0 by 20 was in a blocking state. See here CDP native VLAN got mismatched on the interface F0 by 20. One side here I am using 400 and another side it was using 1, right? So now what I'll do is if you give the command call show spanning tree, see here the interface F0 by 20 was in a blocking stage and it was in a inconsistent state. So here also I'll be creating something called VLAN 400, which is my native VLAN interface F0 by 20 switch port trunk native VLAN 400. Done. So whenever I say this, automatically the interface F0 by 20 is going to unblock and port consistency is going to be restored, right? So now if you go and verify now show interfaces trunk on this side also, I'm running here the native VLAN 400 and interface was in a trunking mode. Now if you go and verify the communication between 1.1 to 1.2, the communication was happening. So this is the way you need to configure the native VLAN